Please stand in honor of God's holy word. Our scripture lesson is from the Old Testament book of Numbers. I'll be reading a few verses from the chapter 27 of the New Living Translation. These women stood before Moses, Eleazar, the priest, the tribe leaders, and the entire community at the entrance of the tabernacle. Our father died in the wilderness, they said. He was not among the Korah's followers who rebelled against the Lord. He died because of his own sin. But he had no sons. Why should the name of our father disappear from the clan just because he had no sons? Give us the property along with the rest of our relatives. So Moses brought their case before the Lord, and the Lord replied to Moses, "The claim of the daughters of Zehadaloth is legitimate. You must give them a grant of the land along with their father's relatives. Assign them the property that would have been given to their father. And give the following instructions to the people of Israel. If a man dies and has no son, then give his inheritance to his daughters. And if he had no daughters either, transfer his inheritance to his brothers. And if he had no brothers, give his inheritance to his father's brothers. But if his father has no brothers, give his inheritance to the nearest relative in his clan. This is the legal requirement for the people of Israel, just as the Lord commanded Moses." May God add the blessing and the reading of this holy word. You may be seated.
As many of you are aware, we have two grandsons. Silas is a little over a year old, and Bo's a little bit over 11 years old. We had a chance to see our grandsons this past week. Bo is playing tennis here in the fall, so we went to watch one of his tennis matches. Once his tennis match was over, the coach was meeting with the team, and Cheryl and our daughter and Silas went on down to the restaurant, and I stayed back to take Bo after he got done with his meeting. Bo jumped into the car when he was finished, and he said to me, "Hey, Grandpa, were you there when the Cubs won this World Series?" And I said, "You mean in 1908? Being the cool grandpa that I think that I am, I wanted to say, yes, we were there for all 7 games. We saw the whole thing unfold. But instead, I used it as an opportunity to say, no, I'm a poor preacher, and we watched it on TV. We were not actually there. And then he went on to say, who do you think will be in the World Series this year? Now, let me take the story back for just a minute. Cheryl is a huge baseball fan. She has been a Cubs fan since 1908 or so. She has taught me a lot about baseball. Before I met Cheryl, about the only thing I knew about baseball is that if it's on the TV, turn to another channel. That's about all I knew about baseball until I met Cheryl. So here's our 11-year-old son asking me who I think is going to be in the World Series. Fortunately for me, on our way over to Logansport, Cheryl said to me, "Hey, look at this. The Braves are the first team to clinch a title. They are in the series." And we chatted about that a little bit on the way over. So I could look brilliant and say, "Hey, did you know that the Braves are the first team?" "No, I didn't know that." And we could talk about that. And fortunately, the restaurant was that close. We could get out and I was clean. Sometimes we know what we're talking about, and sometimes we kind of make our way through the conversation as if we know what we're talking about. In today's lesson, we meet a set of daughters who knew exactly what they were talking about, and they were able to help Moses to see a problem that he had not seen before. Over the past several weeks, we've been following Israel as they've gone from being slaves in Egypt towards the promised land. We saw over the past couple of weeks that they are camping right on the edge of the Jordan River, right across from Jericho. They're on the plains of Moab. Several events happen, and this is another event that's happened there on the plains of Moab as we pick up today's story. Today's story, let me go back. Today's story is about a problem with the law. As Israel is heading towards the promised land, they're going from being slaves to being a country, to being a nation, to be a nation to God's glory. So God gave Moses several laws and several directions on what that nation should look like, what worship should look like, what their interaction, their social interaction should look like. God helped them to understand what it meant to be a nation. And we have not talked about very many of those laws, but today's lesson centers around one of those laws. So these women stood before Moses, Eleazar the priest, the tribal leaders, and the entire community at the entrance of the tabernacle. These women stood before Moses and the rest. Who are these women? Well, if we would have read verse 1 of this chapter, we would have known who these women were just a little bit. It introduces us to these women. Unfortunately, if we would have read the first verse of this chapter, my worship leader would have left, because there are way too many names in that first verse. So we skipped over that and picked it up here in verse 2. So let me see if I can put these women into perspective just a little bit without getting lost in some of these names. We know that everybody in ancient Israel, everyone in the Old Testament, everyone could track their heritage back to one of the tribes of Israel, one of the sons of Jacob. Everybody knew what tribe they were part of. Everyone knew what group they were a part of, and everyone could track their lineage. Eleazar and Moses are related. They're both from the tribe of Levi. We know that. These ladies that I'm about to introduce to you, these ladies are from the tribe of Manasseh. The tribe of Manasseh. It's not a tribe that we talk about too often, but as back at the end of the book of Genesis, when Jacob and his whole family met Joseph there in Egypt, Joseph was the prince of Egypt. Joseph was somebody important, and Jacob and the whole family came in and met him. When they all got together, Jacob started talking about inheritance and what he's going to pass along, and Joseph says, wait, I have 2 sons. Take my inheritance and divide it among them. One of his sons was named Manasseh, and the other son was Ephraim. So Ephraim and Manasseh, this tribe of Manasseh, is directly related to Joseph. So these ladies probably had the same kind of leadership that Joseph had. They probably had that same kind of authority that Joseph had. That much we know about the tribe of Manasseh. We also know that in the first part of the book of Numbers, that Moses took a census of all the people. Moses counted all the people in Israel at the first part of the book of Numbers. That's why part of the reason why the book got its name. After the 40-year time period, after their time of wandering in the wilderness, here in the plains of Moab, Moses counted them a second time. So if we compare the first census at the first part of Numbers to the second census here in the latter part of Numbers, we see that as a whole, the nation of Israel lost about 0.5% of their people. As a whole, in that 40-year time period, Israel as a whole lost about 0.5% of their population. However, the tribe of Manasseh gained about 64% of their people. They from the time of the beginning of Numbers to this time at the end of the 40 years, they gained about 64% of their population. And the tribe of Simeon balances that out. They lost about 63% of their population. So as they're traveling through the wilderness, as they're being punished through this time, Manasseh was able to populate in a lot of ways. They're able to become a very populous tribe within Israel. We also know that God instructed the way that Israel was to camp. He wanted their camp to be orderly. And we've talked about this before. At the center of the camp was the Ark of the Covenant, was the tent of the tabernacle. Then each of the 12 tribes camped in groups of 3 at each of the 4 sides of the tabernacle. Manasseh was on the west side of the tabernacle, along with their brother Ephraim and their brother Benjamin. Manasseh, Ephraim, and Benjamin were on the west side of the tabernacle when they were moving, when they were camping, when they were being a nation. When they get to the promised land, when they are handed their land, the tribe of Manasseh is given land on both sides of the Jordan River, both the east side and the west side. So Manasseh is controlling the Jordan River from the Dead Sea to the Sea of Galilee. So the tribe of Manasseh, they're related to Joseph. The tribe of Manasseh, they increased when everybody else was decreasing. The tribe of Manasseh, they're controlling the Jordan River. That's a little bit about who the tribe of Manasseh is. And these 5 girls are sisters. These 5 girls are sisters. The oldest one, his name is Malala, Mahlah. Malala. This is the oldest of the sisters. And these 5 sisters, they see a problem with the law. And they go to Moses and say, Moses, we got a problem. And Moses says, you're right, you do have a problem. Let's go talk about this. So Moses brings these 5 sisters together, along with the priest, Eleazar, along with the tribal leaders, and they all meet together there at the most important place, at the tabernacle, at the tent of the meeting. This is like these 5 sisters going and talking with the joint session of Congress. This is like these sisters going to the joint session of Congress with the Supreme Court and the president there as well. This is the most important group these ladies can talk to. You ladies have that habit of encouraging one another. You ladies have that habit of bringing the best out in one another. We guys, on the other hand, don't always do that very well. We might encourage one another to jump off a cliff or do something that's dangerous, but we're not always going to encourage one another that's going to benefit others. And yet that's what these 5 sisters did. They were brave enough to talk to Moses. They were brave enough to stand before this political body and talk about their problem. So they say to Moses and Eleazar and the others, our father died in the wilderness. He was not among Korah's followers who rebelled against the Lord. He died because of his own sin. But he had no sons. So these ladies are addressing Moses and the others, and the first thing they say is that our father died in the wilderness. That shouldn't be a surprise. That was the purpose of wandering in the wilderness. When they got there to the edge of the promised land, Moses sent in 12 spies to spy out the land. 10 of the spies came back and said, we look like grasshoppers in their eyes. They're giants. There's no way we can take over this land. And the whole community started saying, why did God bring us here in order to kill us? What's going on here? And because of that rebellion, because they didn't believe, God sent them into the wilderness for 40 years for that generation to die off so that he could bring in the next generation. Hopefully they'd be more faithful and they would take over the land. So here are these 5 sisters saying that our father died in the wilderness. That was the purpose of the wilderness. That's why they were there. But they said he was not part of Korah's followers. We talked about Korah a few weeks ago. In Numbers chapter 16, we meet Korah. Korah was also part of the tribe of Levi. Korah thought that he should be high priest and not Aaron. He thought that God had made a mistake and that he, Korah, should be among the leaders of Israel. He got about 250 people around him. They all went to Moses and said, Moses, we want to be important like you are. Moses says, let me take that to God and I'll come back and talk to you. But meanwhile, why don't you guys dress up like a priest? Why don't you guys offer incense like a priest? Why don't you guys come back and look like the role that you want to follow? So they came back and they stood before Moses. And while Moses was talking to them, God opened up the ground and swallowed up Korah and his 250 people and swallowed it back up again. It's a shocking story. It's a story that reminds us of God's power. It's a story that reminds us of who God is. And yet these girls are saying, our father died. But it wasn't because of Korah. It was because of natural causes. So here are these 5 sisters. Here are these 5 sisters, and they approach Moses. And they say to Moses, our father died in the wilderness, and yet we have no brothers. It's just the 5 of us girls. Now, in the Jewish way of saying things, and I'm not saying I agree with this, but in the Jewish way of seeing things at that time, they would see that a family was blessed if they have sons. If a set of parents have boys, then they say that family is blessed. If a family has a set of girls and no sons, they would say they were less blessed. If a family had no children whatsoever, they would say, well, they're not blessed at all. So this is the mindset. This is what Moses and Aaron are thinking as these girls come to them and say, we have no brothers. Now, let me just say, if a group of girls came to me and said they have no brothers, I would have pity on their father. As you know, I've done a little bit of youth ministry in my day, and I've entered into classrooms where there were girls, 5 and more girls in this classroom, and I couldn't wait to get out of that classroom. If I had 5 daughters, I would be in my garage a lot. And maybe sneak in to take a nap and then leave again. Maybe I would buy a bunch of cows. Girls, go milk the cows. Girls, get out of the house. Go find something to do. If I had 5 daughters, what would you do? I don't want to know. Cheryl and I were talking about this section this week. And Cheryl said, if I had 5 daughters, she said, if I had 5 daughters, that each of these girls would have me wrapped around their little finger. I'm glad she has confidence in me, because I'm not sure that would be my attitude. But that's where we are in this story. These girls have a problem. These 5 sisters have a problem, and they bring it to Moses. And they said to Moses, the problem is that we're about to enter the promised land. We're about to enter what we've been looking for. And according to the law, according to the instructions that God gave to Moses, when the land is divided, these girls will not inherit any land. According to the law of Moses, according to the law that God gave to Moses, that when a father owned land, he would pass it along to his sons so that the tribe would stay together. So if a son from Manasseh got married, that he would inherit land from Manasseh, so that tribe would stay together. But if a girl got married, that she would inherit from her husband. So if one of these girls from Manasseh married a guy from Naphtali, then she would inherit the Naphtali land, so that group would stay together. So evidently these 5 girls are not married, and they feel like they have no prospect of getting married. They have no father, he has died. They have no brother, and so they're going to be overlooked when the land is divided. They will, as other people are enjoying the Holy Land, they are going to be living at the Holiday Inn. They're not going to have any land to call their own. Now, we know that you ladies like to chat among yourselves. And it's likely that as these girls were growing up, as these girls were doing their chores, that they would talk about what their future would look like. And they would talk about how this girl would paint her house blue because she loves blue, and that daughter would paint her house green, and that daughter would paint her house pink. And they talked about who would come over and plant flowers in each one of their houses. And they would talk about what their future would look like. And yet as they read the law, as they're there on the edge of the promised land, they're seeing how that's not going to be what happens. How they're going to feel shut out of Israel. They're going to feel like they're not part of the rest of the nation. The rest of the nation owns land. The rest of the nation is a part of this group, and they're not going to own land, and they're going to feel like they're locked out of what God has promised to the whole nation. You know, here in the New Testament, there are times that we make people feel locked out of the church. There are times here in the New Testament that we make people feel shut out, unwelcome, not that we don't want you here. In the New Testament, we leaders at times will emphasize verses, will emphasize passages that make people feel shut out. We might emphasize the passage that talks about wives, submit to your husband. We might emphasize passages that say that women shouldn't have any leadership role over men. We might emphasize those kind of passages that make you ladies feel shut out of the church, not part of the church, not part of what we want. But the reality is that God is opening the door. God is broadening our vision of what we want from you ladies and from one another. We know that Jesus empowered a lot of ladies to be bigger than what they were hearing from the Jewish people. We know that Paul was talking about structure in the church. Just as the universe is organized under God's power, so he wants the church to be organized to represent God's power. He's not talking about putting anybody down. He's talking about building everybody up and representing God to the world. So as we hear these types of stories, may we not feel locked out. May we feel broadened. May we feel open. May we feel God at work within us so that we can be the best that God's called us to be. So these ladies came to Moses and said, it's not fair. The land is going to be divided and we're going to be locked out. We're going to be shut out from this. Moses says, well, that's a shame. I don't like that whatsoever. And so Moses did what he did so well, and he went to God and he says, let's talk about that. So God came back to Moses and he said, the clan of the daughters of Zelophehad is legitimate. You must give them a grant of the land along with their father's relatives. Assign them the property that would have been given to their father. God comes back to Moses, and God says to Moses, these ladies are correct. There is a mistake in the law. There is a problem in the law. And we need to correct that by allowing these ladies to own land. Now, this is 2,000 years before Jesus was born. This is deep in the Old Testament. And here is God saying that ladies are allowed to own land. We're not told what the reaction to this law is. It's possible that these 5 sisters who thought that they were never going to be married all of a sudden became the most popular girls in town. Here they are owning land. Here they are somebody of substance. Here they are with this land at their disposal. And it could be that everybody all across Israel now wants to date those girls so they can get their hands on some of this land. We're not told. Or it could be that everybody around them tried to make these ladies fail. It's possible that they tried to organize business situations where the ladies would fail. It's possible that other men tried to swindle the land away from them. Isn't that exactly what's at the heart of most John Wayne movies? Some lady out west has land and everyone's trying to take it from him, so John Wayne has to step in and say, hold on a minute there. We're not told. We're not told what the reaction was. We're told that God established, that God granted, that God allowed them to break with tradition and to own land. But we're not told how other people saw that. We know that God is still at work in our world. We know that God is still at work even today. We know that God forgives people. We know that God accepts people in salvation. We know that God empowers people. We know that God is at work in our church. But there's sometimes that we don't like the way God works. There's times that we say, but that person doesn't deserve to be forgiven. There's times that we say, but that person shouldn't be allowed salvation. There's times that we say that that person shouldn't have a second chance. There's times that we second guess. There's times that we think that God's made a mistake. There's times that we try to say, no, that person doesn't deserve this grace. All the while forgetting that we don't deserve grace. We don't deserve salvation. We don't deserve to be forgiven. We don't deserve to be part of the kingdom. And yet that's granted to us. And we should have that same kind of attitude as others are granted, as others are pardoned, as others see God at work as well. Sometimes we make others feel bad when we shouldn't. So here are these ladies, and they come before Moses. And they come before Moses and say, we have a problem with this land distribution. And they remind Moses about Korah. Korah had a problem with Moses and the law, and they were killed right there. It's possible that these ladies were going to be killed as well. They didn't know. But Moses took it to God, and God says, you're right. We're going to do that. In fact, God says, let's amend the law and give the following instructions to all the people of Israel. If a man dies and doesn't have a son, then give his inheritance to the girls. And if he has no daughters either, then give it to his brothers. And on and on and on. He gives several scenarios that could happen in order for people to know how to keep the land in their tribal area and yet honor God and to honor their land. God said he's going to amend the law. God said we're going to fix the law. That there's a problem with our law, and we're going to make it right. And the question is, could God not see this problem coming? Couldn't he have seen that storm cloud coming? Couldn't he have put that in the law in the first place and not made these girls to go through this problem, to go through this fretting about, to go through this facing Moses? Couldn't God have put that in the law and fixed it before it was a problem? Couldn't he have shielded them from that storm? Or couldn't God have fixed the situation? Back a few years ago when the family was having children, instead of giving them 5 daughters, couldn't he have given them 4 daughters and a son, and that would have solved everything? You know, that one girl's kind of masculine, we could have made her a boy and it would have been solved everything. Couldn't God have seen this storm coming and fixed the problem before it hit? We all have storms in our life. We all have situations that we don't expect. We all have things that come into our life that take us off guard, that are storms that we don't like. And God could have fixed the storm before it hit us. God could have caused that car to go around us so that it didn't hit us. God could have fixed my body so I don't have this cancer. God could have done something so that we didn't know this storm was coming. God could fix the law. God could have done all kinds of things, because it doesn't surprise God that these things are going on. He knows that they're going to happen. He's in charge of everything. So couldn't God have fixed it to where the problem didn't happen? Couldn't he have made everything sunny so that we could have enjoyed life a little bit? But if God would have fixed the problem before we knew it was a problem, we wouldn't turn to God. If God would have fixed the problem before we knew it was a problem, we wouldn't know that God's in charge. If God would have made that car go around instead of hitting us, if God would have fixed my body so I don't have this sickness, if God would have fixed this law to where these girls didn't have this problem, if God would have fixed the problem before it was a problem, we wouldn't give God the glory. But instead, as we see these problems, instead, when these things come upon our life, when life takes those unexpected twists and turns, it doesn't surprise God. And it should drive us closer to God. Instead of running away from God, instead of blaming God, instead of pointing our finger at God, instead of saying, "Where are you, God?" instead of throwing things at God, it should turn us back to God so we can see His power at work. So we can see how He's walking with us. So we can see His great love for us. Yeah, He could have fixed the problem so we don't have a problem. But He loves us enough to allow us to walk with Him through these problems. These girls came to Moses and they said, "Moses, we got this problem with the law." And God says, "You're right. Since you've seen the problem, since you acknowledged the problem, we're going to fix the problem." And sometimes God is waiting for us to go to Him in prayer. We have the honor of prayer. We have the privilege of prayer. And there are times that God is waiting for us to come to him in prayer, laying out our problems. It doesn't surprise him. He knows what's going on, but helping him to hear from us, knowing that this bothers us so that he can walk with us and help us to understand. We have the privilege of going to him. We have the privilege of walking with him. We have the privilege of seeing how he's in control. These ladies came to Moses and said, we have a problem. Moses says, you're right, we do have a problem. And God says, I'm bigger than this problem. And this is how we're going to fix this solution. Since you brought this to us, since we are talking about it, this is how we're going to do it. I don't know what kind of week you've had. And I certainly don't know what's ahead of us this coming week. There could be all kinds of surprises that's going to affect each one of us. There could be all kinds of situations that are just waiting around the corner. We don't know. But we do know that God is in control. And we do know that God walks with us through these kind of situations. And as we turn to God and as we draw close to God, he will walk with us. And he will help us to see how much he loves us. So may we not curse the problems of our life. May we not run from God in the problems of our life. May we run to God in the problems of our life. Let's pray. Lord God, we do thank you for all the ways that you walk with us. And we thank you for all the ways that you love us. So help us to draw close to you. Help us to love you deeply. Help us to hand you our problems. In Jesus' name we ask this. Amen.